Okay, good afternoon, evening, everyone. My name is Adriana Rodran. I'll be the moderator of this Green-Red Dialogue that is called From Silence to Action, Europe in front of the genocide. This event had to be moderated by Marc Rius, the president of the Nous Horizons Foundation, but unfortunately, he is unable to join the session. Therefore, I will be the person moderating, but I'd like to thank him for preparing the whole event and the effort made to make this come true. To speak about the genocide in Palestine and the role Europe can play in this human disaster, if we can call it this way. We have three keynote speakers. First of all, we have Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield. She's a French politician from Europe Écologique Les Verts, and served as a member of the European Parliament from 2019 to 2024. She specializes in democratic and rule of law issues, and she's been vice president of the Greens EFA group and a member of the committees of constitutional affairs and foreign interference. She's also the rapporteur of the rule of law in Hungary. She also took part in the conference on the future of Europe and the EU-UK Parliamentary Assembly. She currently was the vice president of the Green European Foundation, which is our collaborator and the organization that we stem from and we organize this event with. We now have also Aina Vidal. She is a Catalan politician, a member of the Spanish Congress. She was connected to the since a young age to eco-socialism and trade union movements, and she's been active in Joves d'Esquerra, Verda, and Comisión Obrera. Since 2015, she has served as an MP for Barcelona, first with Comú Podem and later on with Sumar. In the parliament, she has focused her work about labor rights, social justice, and feminist issues. And in 2020, she publicly mentioned that she was undergoing a cancer treatment while remaining active in politics. She is a clear example of activist politics. And finally, we have Gabriel Garroum. He is a lecturer in international relations in Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. He holds a PhD in World Studies from King's College of London, and his research focuses on critical international relations, international security, and Middle Eastern politics, with particular attention to the case of Syria. As you can see, these are three different profiles that will cover a wide range of information that will help us collectively think about what is the role that the European Union should play when genocide happens next door. Well, if you don't know me, my name is Aina Roman. I'm a researcher at Amsterdam University, and I collaborate with the Green European Foundation and Nous Horizons Foundation about the evaluation of these Green-Red dialogues. Today's event will be organized in a very simple way. We prepared some questions for our speakers. Questions first we'll start with Gabriel for Aina Vidal as well, and we'll finish with a European perspective with a question for Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield. We'll make a brief debate followed by some questions from the audience. So this event intends to last approximately for 1 hour. We know that the online dialogues are a bit more complex to follow, and evidently, if something happens during this session that and you think that you would like to cover and is not being covered, I'm sure we'll be able to contact with our speakers. So having introduced these three people and having introduced the topic as well, I think it's up to Gabriel Garroum. And the first question is the following. Gabriel, do you think that the current negotiations are designed merely to allow a humanitarian pause or to legitimize a colonial status quo? How do you detect it from your field of expertise of Arab politics, or in the case of Syria, that is a neighbor state of Palestine? Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this very important dialogue, and it's a true pleasure to share this debate with Aina and Gwendoline as well. Let me tell you the following. Was being presented as a peace solution is not a solution, and it's not a peace solution specifically. It resembles a ceasefire, imposed ceasefire, rather than a solution. To speak about solutions, normally in international relations and in other fields of politics, obviously, we speak about mechanisms that allow us to go to the core of the problems, even more if we are speaking about an armed conflict or a situation of war, and approaching in a more balanced or as balanced as possible all the grievances, the key problems of the conflict, of the problems that we are dealing with. What we found in Gaza recently with this kind of plan articulated by Donald Trump is a response which is focused on security, and it's an answer that, one more, the way it's been drafted, the type of interests it keeps in mind, it's been articulated unidirectionally. It is so because the security interests that are there are only covering one party, and the way in which we or they deal with Palestine issue leaves aside the important elements with respect to self-determination, with occupation, with administrative nature of Palestine itself, and also it discards from the negotiation table the Palestinian actors. And here, for example, in the response from Hamas and other actors, they said we at least want those that command the transition towards the future are at least Palestinian technocrats. Please notice the low threshold of demand that we are observing. How is this, or how can this be explained? Well, in different ways. One of them is the structural weakness in Palestine or of Palestine. The Palestinian Authority is not there, not even expected, and in Jordan is the next hot potato in this situation. We are living a very delicate, specific moment. It wouldn't be crazy to think about a coming intifada. That's a different matter. However, Hamas obviously has been decapitalized in a big volume of action, and they have a limited strategic threshold. Qatar and Libya and others are there, and we are focusing on a regional order where Israel, with the American coverage and of some European actors, has been able to design an exit which is not fully covering all the goals. It's a quite important strategic defeat for Netanyahu, but it is also reducing the climate of pressure and isolation that had been seen up until now. Thank you, Gabriel. In that respect, what role, from your perspective, is the colonial element playing in the origins and of versions of the conflict in Palestine? And also, I would like to add, how does it shape any ceasefire that fails to address this dimension? Well, actually, this term pacification is a colonial term, and is this rationale. One of Trump's points, the way it's been drafted, is very interesting. It states something like a government in Gaza that guarantees the interests of security of Israel and other actors. So security, safety is a prerogative of others. It's never a prerogative of Palestinian citizens. Here we have a colonial element. The colonial trajectory is essential. We would not be speaking about the Palestinian question unless we considered the colonial history, from the violence of the European states towards Jewish communities, down to the decision of Great Britain and others of including the Darfur laws, or creating a national home, more specifically to what was called the British Mandate for Palestine, which again was an articulation that not only was colonial, but the system of mandates was something very particular. That was the idea that there is a colonial distribution, but also we have the idea of tutelating these people towards self-determination. Arab, post-Ottoman Empire, not enough, not modern enough, not adult enough, not capable enough, so that we had to tutelate towards the idea of modern state. And this modern subject is identified as Israel, the state of Israel. This is the history of Orientalism, the making the desert or turning the desert into a field of flowers, a state without a land and a land without a state, something that began in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and that's coming up until now. We can see the way in which many politicians or many political options approach how they approach this question. And obviously, if the conditions, the key conditions of the conflict are not approached, which is self-determination and occupation, these two rationals, obviously we're speaking about pacification solutions, period, not more, not less. In that respect, Gabriel, one of the big elements that have been silenced in the public debate in the last few months was the role of other European powers or even the European Union. And in this respect, from your academic position, what is the role of European powers when conditioning their support to any peace agreement, not only a ceasefire, as we could see up until now, but also creating these structural changes, a right to return, an end of occupation, or a transitional justice? Well, here, Aina and Gwendoline will have a better perspective than me. But from my position, Europe has been leaving aside other questions with a greater historical trajectory. Europe has been thinking about the strategic autonomy and this style of pragmatic idealism, the idea in which Europe had been articulated as a stronghold of ideals, of regulations, and a kind of democracy, and of making policies in a certain way, and in the way in which we live in, structured through this competition between the US, Russia, China, the idea of returning to war as an option of a foreign policy. Well, Europe felt very blurry due to internal debates, which won't allow Europe to act in a unified way, but also as a project, as identity and way of doing politics. And this question, obviously, the question of Palestine is going to the core of the positioning of the European Union, because in a certain way it forces European Union to face the mirror, and it may be painful if you cannot maintain a certain degree of coherence. We could see this with the response of Ukrainian response versus the response towards the Syrian refugees, which forced the European Union to nearly say deliberately, yes, we don't consider you all alike, and this is painful, this hurts. The liberal project reaches the edges. If you want to know the nature of a project, check the margins and see if this project is implemented in the margins. But if it's not, we have a problem. And in the case of Gaza, this has been even more evident. What are we requesting in Europe? We request coherence, we request celerity, and we request a strategic vision. What happened here? Well, obviously, Europe has been hardly or strongly conditioned by the German politics. It has a relationship with this conflict, very specific, very specific. I'm underscore this, and Europe has been extremely ambivalent in some cases, then deliberately a counterpoint, an important counterpoint for Israeli politics. It took 2 years to review the commercial agreement, and we have not reached a clear agreement in that respect. It was relatively simple to reach a conclusion with respect to if Israel respects human rights with respect to this idea of commercial agreement. Therefore, what can Europe do now? Well, do what it can do best. That is, offer technical knowledge. Europe is particularly good in technical issues. Ceasefire, this idea of a Gaza post-conflict, apart from the political visions which are extremely problematic that are being proposed, what it really requires is know-how on how a good humanitarian support plan is done, how to rearticulate a government legitimacy, capacity. If Europe is capable of taking all this into the table, will be positive. But internationally, the climate between Europe and the U.S. Is not good, and the U.S. Clearly put Europe aside. Paul Morillas, in the book that he wrote, spoke about the patio of the big guys. This idea of Europe, or this idea of taking the Europe out of this patio of the big guys, is clear. Thank you, Gabriel. Let's leave your intervention here for a moment, but in the synthesis questions, it'll be very interesting to see how your explanation complements what Gwendoline's and Aina's answers are structured, and see how we can generate these reality clashes of these shared narratives that we need to get out of these colonial frameworks. From Europe, when we talk about colonialism, we think about Africa, we think about Latin America, but we never think about Middle East, which the term Middle East is colonial because middle with respect to who? Respect to us, of course. So thank you for your interventions. And let me now continue with Aina Vidal. Aina, we believe that from the state policy, you are one of the politicians that has been most clearly positioned with respect to genocide in Palestine. And one of the things that we heard you defending is that the current framework is not guaranteeing a genuine peace. From the Congress of Spain, the policies don't seem to reinforce the limited agreement. They promote a structural transformation that we believe is necessary to revert at least this situation. So, what is your position about this? Well, we have many contradictions or inequalities expressed by Gabriel between the European Union with its reaction in different states has a certain explanation. Let me just leave three explanations that are important, I think. One is poverty. In this case, in Palestinian society, or the capacity of having an effect by Israel in weapon terms. We have some commercial elements. And second element that I think is important is religion. In this conflict, we have a heavy Islamophobia, which is very important. At least we have to keep it in mind. That explains the reaction of some countries with respect to Ukraine or Gaza. And there's a third element, which are the traumas of World War II. And I'm not only speaking about Germany, which is evident, but also, in this case, the UK, once it decided to offer a territory like Palestine to Israel. There's been a negation of reality, ignoring for decades the apartheid regime that Palestinians face, and also right now living a genocide and an ethnic cleansing. There's been a clear will of negation. That's why we believe, or I believe, that from the Congress, the first thing we could do is to give names and last names, or identify the conditions that cannot be accepted, because if we do not define it, anything that we understand as a ceasefire will be presented as a victory, even if it consolidates the status quo, which is not understanding what is happening right now. This also means passing resolutions, but it means passing laws that determine some guiding principles. I don't like to call it this way, but that are quote-unquote non-negotiable, because any position the government has to have, it has to be facing Palestine. I believe we need to have some minimum conditions, but facing the situation, we should be talking about the end of the blockage and occupation, recognizing the Palestinian state that is sovereign, the right to return, and the end to this ethnic cleansing. We're speaking about the end of the apartheid and colonies regime. This said by Gabriel in all the Gaza Strip, and a very delicate situation. And as far as I understand it, and we in our party understand it, give an answer in the International Court of Justice. Uh, I think that in the Congress, in the Congress of Spain, cannot politically support or diplomatically support any plan that is not incorporating these elements. And this is what determines the difference between a limited agreement that is not only managing violence, freeing the hostages, death, the letting resources enter in the area, or a current situation that gives an answer to the situation that is really being lived not only now, but for decades in Palestine. To me, the problem is not the lack of mechanisms, but rather the clear lack of will to implement them. We have mechanisms, many. And the Congreso de los Diputados in Spain can have a key role, turning this will into clear mandates that condition, well, the situation. If you allow me to say so, this should be not necessary. This has to do with the Convention of Geneva, or the Convention Against Genocide, or the Rome bylaws. We're speaking about the agreements reached between Europe and Israel. All of this exists. Clear parameters are set, very well set, and which shouldn't remind it from the Congreso de los Diputados in Spain, but we definitely need to remind it, every 5 minutes whenever we have the chance. And El Congreso de los Diputados is an important place. That's why I don't think we need new mechanisms. We have what we need, but we need the political will to implement it. And here we have a problem, both in Spain as well as evidently in Europe. I reckon that the European Union has proved that in the era of contradictions and inequalities, well, it can stop treaties, generate multi-million economic sanctions, expulsing a certain state, Russia or whatever state, from any sports event or cultural event. Therefore, it is evident that mechanisms are there. What's missing here are not laws or legality, is the implementation of things. And this is not an easy thing, because this needs to be clear. We have a majority, we have a government from the left wing with a democratic majority, but that it includes not small elements of disagreement in the genocide. We could have alternative majorities that could not obviate certain type of agreement. Why it's taking so long to implement certain regulations? So therefore, we have a background situation. I believe that whenever, well, in this case, Europe is proving such a firm attitude in front of Russia, but not doing so in another case, the hierarchy of pain. To me, it's very uncomfortable, trying to make others believe what the Ukrainian people is as a minor thing. It's a war, actually. But we're living in Palestine is a different nature, from a different galaxy. All reports from the European Union or the United Nations stated it's a genocide. We are playing in a bigger match. There is a need to have a change in the new world order. It is evident that Israel and the US are going hand by hand, and that their will is that not that Europe plays a role. Obviously, there should be a conflict resolution approach, but we're thinking about economic development or considering climate change. We understood it at the COP30 in Brazil, where a part of this political will has failed. And when we say that this sounds like a slogan, Europe has its credibility at stake, its moral credibility at stake in Palestine. We're speaking about this. We're speaking about if we break this rationale by which your rights are respected depending on what your PO box is, and this breaks the transnational principles. If we cannot maintain these principles, it'll be very difficult for us to maintain peace or a long-lasting solution in time, transferring the current situation. And also, what we have at stake is a lot more, is irrelevance, and the fact that other powers and other political rationales based not only on authoritarianism, which is what we see now, but an exacerbate neoliberalism that allows itself to sell, internationally sell, on the ashes and bones of the Gazan kids, building a resort where people will be able to breathe fresh air, or playing aqua gym. Well, it's perverse. It's a huge contradiction. What could be a meme that is not, because we've seen that the negotiators in the U.S., for example, when trying to negotiate between Gaza and Israel, this shows that this current situation, we have to use all the tools available. Catalan government, city council, city or regional groups, we have to have it at all levels. Thank you, Aina. I believe that you have answered another question I had for you. But, being answered with what is not so clear, considering what I had to ask you, is the value of diplomacy. You talked about the political role that can be achieved, but we have a diplomatic group of diplomats that can do a lot more. It can go beyond the symbolic recognition of the conflict, or demanding, as previously said, the minimum real conditions, such as the end of occupation, the rights of refugees. How do you value this diplomatic body where Europe could use to generate alliances and groups against which some people react to implement new measures? Well, this is key. This is a key element if we are capable of defending certain principles or not. Gabriel said something about this, the way of doing politics, which is different in the European Union framework, or at least it was so. And this is part of this way of articulating it. It's not just giving everything for free. Sometimes we are dealing with unknown elements, but when we talk about diplomacy, is that there should be a body of people. In this case, we require expertise in the area of managing and conflict resolution based on some foundational principles, and not so foundational, as I said before, and that have the will and the mandate to try to reach solutions. This means that you have to be able to negotiate with everyone, with everything, considering that some things cannot be negotiated. But well, that's the point we are at right now. I believe that we cannot abandon this flag. Doing so is difficult. If right now I had to answer and say we cannot do anything else from diplomacy, well, then the question that we should ask ourselves then is what? What can we do? What is there left? Because the political way, at least the democratic way, is falling apart. We have to put our emphasis in diplomacy and continue offering them the capacity and the specific way, so that when they go to meetings, having the power to negotiate, you should have a national pressure that is conditioning you to make certain decisions. I don't believe that the Socialist Party, I don't believe it. So it was not easy to pass the modification to introduce that in case of genocides, there could be a suspension of previous agreement of commerce of weapons. This was not easy. This happened because of a pressure and a constant pressure. We have to be aware of this. The pressure we can generate in the streets, the pressure we can generate in different institutions, etc., is directly proportional to the capacity of pressure that diplomats can use when going to other meetings and try to pass agreements in the sense of the principles that are we are trying to determine from our institutions, no matter what they are. I think that this is a key element, the effort of the diplomatic body and to give them as many tools as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Aina. Now, finally, we'll go to speak about the European perspective, and who better than Gwendoline to give us a new perspective and speak about these affairs. Gwendoline, the first question is, what should the European Union demand to prevent the recurrence of a weak or instrumental agreement?
Hello, good evening, everyone. There's a lot of rain in Brussels, so I hope it won't make too much noise. I mean, I think that the problem we have is that EU needs to change completely its way of dealing with the Israeli and Palestine topic. So, I mean, it's what should they do or not to prevent is they should change the framework they work in, basically. It's been said and said again. So, I mean, I will just partially repeat things that have already been said, but also really focus on the fact that there's been a difference since the beginning in treatment in two situations that occurred basically at the same time, which is Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine was a bit earlier, of course, but Ukraine and Gaza. There was a real difference in treatment, and that is not because there's a bad instrument. I mean, I completely agree with Aina. The instruments are there. The way we should do things are there. Now, the question is, why don't you react in the same way in one situation in another? And I think you've said it very well. This is because we are in a very colonialist vision of the situation from the EU point of view. I mean, EU is in a way anyway embedded in history of colonialism. Most of the big countries of EU have a colonialist past, and also the project of EU, I will not go into the details now, but there's a lot of text that have been done on it and shows that the project of EU was a colonialist project anyway since the very beginning, and also in the way further that it reacted at the world through its trade agreements today and through the way that it is cooperating or not with other countries. It's always in a very post-colonialism way. So we have a structural problem here. And Gaza is even a worse situation. I mean, Palestine is in even worse situation because it's completely in the history of Europe colonialism and in the history of Europe guilt and tragedy. So, I mean, this very specific situation of Israel, indeed, which means that we have different way of reacting also in Europe, depending on the countries and the very specific stories. I think we really need to acknowledge the specific situation of Germany here, which of course has always driven one of the reaction of the EU in general, which is a complete reaction embedded in guiltness, and that's all. And it's a bit the base of the way they act. And I want to be very clear on that I think that Germany has made a huge work that most of our countries have not on the Second World War. I come from France. In France, we barely acknowledge our responsibility in the genocide of Jews. For a long time, decades, we said it was because we were occupied by the Nazi, but ourselves, we were not doing anything about the Jews. And when we did acknowledge, we've always found ways to give us the victim side. We were obliged by the Nazi and all this. We didn't do the children, which is not true. We have been proven, but it was an American historian that wrote the book about how French administration was involved in the genocide of Jews, even before the Germans were obliging us to do it, for example, for the children. So the Germany has made this big work, and I think this can be acknowledged and even recognized as a good thing, but it is today a real handicap in the way that we work with Israel, because even when historians of Israel, philosophers of Israel, big thinkers of Israel say we are in a fascist country. I mean, these are words that have been used by Israeli people working on the topic. Germany is not capable of facing that reality. Very recently, Chancellor Merz made a very clear remark saying, you know, whatever they will do, we will always support them. It was a clear sentence. It's like a parent with a child that would become a monster, you know, a killer. You have this thing about, we will support them anyway. This is embedded in our colonialist story. It also means very ambiguous relationship from other countries, France, Austria, and others. And this is the dominating feeling that have made us work on Gaza, Palestine, and Israel in general. The fact also, of course, that we have no foreign affairs strategy, coherent strategy. We are beginning to have a coherent strategy in defense, which is very different from foreign affairs because of Ukraine and Russia. But on foreign affairs, we have no coherent strategy. We just do whatever is the feeling at that moment. And because it's not written and we don't have a clear diplomatic strategy for EU, because we say this is not an EU competence. Of course, we have this special job of the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, but it's not a real strategy. It also means that it depends a bit on who is the commissioner at the time, who is the president of the commission. The fact that the president of the commission is a German conservative also has an implication, of course. So politics has been always driving all of this, which is normal in diplomacy, but it has been driving it on ad hoc situation, ad hoc feelings, ad hoc understanding of the situation, and not in a global strategy. And of course, if we had more Irish people involved, more Spanish people involved, more Croatian people involved, this would change the way that we work and look at this situation. But even the Belgium have a different vision. But, you know, these are not the voices that are the most heard. And this has made a big difference. So what I would say is that we just need to abide a coherent, ethical way of doing things, strategic way and coherent way of doing our diplomacy and foreign affairs. That would be the way that we should be involved, and that would prevent I mean, there's other factors in the way that peace can be in Israel and Palestine, of course, but this, at least if EU was coherent all the time, it would change completely how we deal with the situation. And of course, for example, one of the big examples, but I think it's been said already, is that we should just clearly obey international laws and what international says. And this is a very specific case where we have been saying we will not oblige ourselves with international law. It's the president of France, Macron, saying, you know, the International Court of Justice, I will not listen with what they say. Council of Europe saying, countries saying we will not listen to what Council of Europe says when they use the word genocide. I mean, the word genocide was used already by international structures and institutions, and EU was not using it and still is not using it. So this is our general problem because we are indeed embedded in this colonialist history.
Disculpa, gràcies, Gwendoline.
Excuse me, Gwendoline. Well, in that respect, and continuing with would you structured in the previous answer, another question that I would like to ask you is, what is the role that European green movements can play in the shaping of a peace agenda, a more just peace agenda? Thank you.
Well, I think we have a problem as green movements because I mean, it has to be recalled maybe that we were born most of the time, a majority of times, from pacifist structures. The usual history of creation of green movements in the 60s and 70s is Friends of the Earth or climate organization, environmental organization, feminist organization, and pacifist organization. This is the most usual history of the foundation of our green movements. And we were really very deeply embedded there again in this peace history. Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium, all of this. The new parties, for example, in the Baltics, they come from a complete different history. They are very new. They don't have at all this pacifist history, so they have a complete other view. And we have not reworked and seriously on all of this. And we don't know what to do in a world of war. So we have a great, I would just say that we have a huge work to do. It is true for our own territory. We don't know exactly what to do about Ukraine at the moment. We are in a very difficult situation where some of our countries, Poland, Baltic countries, but even Brussels, have had these invasion of drones and other problems coming from Ukraine. So in general, our parties say, you know, we should put money in defense, but we don't know how to build the peace in a war situation like we are living at this moment. And we especially, and of course, dealing about peace outside of our territory is even more difficult for us, and more specifically in the case of Israel. I mean, there are things that the green movements, specifically if we're talking not just in general about peace, but about Palestine, Israel, should really, really push for. And I think we were not vocal enough about it. It's the trade agreements. The trade agreement with Israel just needs to stop. There's no mystery about this. We stopped all our relationship and partnership with Russia 2 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine. Of course, in the case of Palestine, Israel, we have the 7th of October, which was a very specific event, and that meant that we were in a situation where we were thinking you have guilt on both sides, and we're not taking any side between Israel and Palestine. In Ukraine, Russia, immediately we took a side. But after a few months and even more today in 2025, we should be very clear that there is an imbalance and there is a problem, and we should deal with that. And this is the trade agreement is the tool of EU. We have funds today coming from EU for research still in Israel. We don't do any Horizon and any other big project, EU project with Russia anymore. We still do with Israel. And more specifically, we have money going for research on military and on arms. And we have still a lot of countries buying and selling arms to Israel. So these are things where I find that Greens could have been clearly, since the very beginning, very vocal, aligned, and we have not managed to be aligned on that, and I think this is sad. And you know, be the force behind these things that are simple, no mysterious, no new tool. I don't believe in new tools. I believe in all of these tools we have and we don't use.
Moltes gràcies, Gwendoline.
Thank you so much, Gwendoline. Evidently, thank you for the passion and for the power in your message. I believe that it's very common to see in these cases that we cannot not differentiate one part from the other, and well, good for not doing it, because many people try not to do it, and this is one of the problems we have when facing very violent situations. Finally, and just to finish this session, I would like to launch a common question to the three of you. And each one of you, maybe you could give me a brief answer in order to have a closing food for thought of this dialogue, which is a dialogue that is supported by the Green European Foundation with the local support of New Horizons Foundation. Aina, Gabriel, and Gwendoline, if you could use a minimum indispensable condition so that Europe becomes engaged in a long-lasting way, what would that condition be, and how do you propose to ensure its fulfillment? We're speaking about the case of the Palestinian genocide, so a condition in that respect. Who dares to break the ice?
Yes, I will insist once again on the long-term complete change of partnership with Israel. I think EU needs to change its partnership, its way of being a partner with Israel. For the moment, it has been a silent partner, a consenting partner, a very indulgent partner all the time. So this is not possible, and we have so many relationship areas with Israel. There's a lot of things that we can do. That's for the long term. In the very short term, I think that EU should be the one saying Palestine people need to be around the table in all of the next discussions, like we are supposed to do also for Ukraine and Russia. And I think on this, again, we have not been vocal at all. EU in general has not said, we need Palestine around the table. EU is already fighting to be around the table, and it's not. So it is a problem, but it also should be them to us to say, with our values of EU, we really want Palestine to be involved in the process.
Thank you, Gwendoline. Gabriel?
I would go back to the point of the Convention of the Genocide Prevention. I think it's a key element. All these states in the world have the obligation, legal obligation, of not doing anything that allows creating a genocide. We are all forced by this rule, by this regulation. Therefore, if the European member states of the European Union do not have the will of fulfilling this international law, this has a political weight which is absolutely gigantic. If the European Union is not following multilateralism, and then, well, if this is not the case, let's stop and let's go home. We cannot ask many other countries in the world that international law have had a hard time understanding. Then, well, and as Aina said, we'll have to put pressure on governments on the line of this obligation of all member states of not doing anything that allows genocide. Thank you, Gabriel. Aina? Well, let me finish with one idea. We heard about the economy of genocide. It was a political, military, and economic structure that in practice generates benefits, generates control, and above all, generates a great deal of power. And it does so through the systematic destruction of a country, not punctually, but it's a destruction of a system. Just to give you an example, one on the case of Palestine in North American interest, have the idea of creating a resort, and this would be a real estate success, obviously, but this has the complexity of the state of Israel. They had to clean the elements of this that disturb their economic activity, which is people in Israel. But we're living such complex times in history, and what we see right now. We see it with the sanctions that instead of reaching the state of Israel, are reaching the judges and the relator of the court, and this is being done by the U.S. It's a frontal attack to the rule of law, international rule of law. It's not just a judge, but 4 judges of the International Penal Court and a special rapporteur with very clear consequences in the European Union. We're speaking about the fact that they cannot have bank accounts or Visas or MasterCards or Google or Apple. They cannot book a hotel with Expedia, but they cannot do that. This means that European banks should close their accounts, and the banking institutions should deny their rights. How can Europe collaborate in the prosecution of a European judge for having authorized arresting Netanyahu, who's a war criminal and a genocide? I think that this should be reported, because we are living moments that escape the capacity of explaining things, and we get lost in elements that are not unimportant, and we forget the essential elements. How can Europe face the economy of the genocide? It's a key element. And if I had to ask something to the European Union other than putting an end to any kind of complicity, as I said before, well, what I would ask is collaboration. Please, Europe, collaborate to put some support on this world. It's hundreds of thousands of operations and companies. She said it's the job of a lifetime. It'll take decades to finish this report and the consequences of the report. Without the shadow of a doubt, the European Union could collaborate with a consensus, realizing that there's a consensus in this economy of war. Well, let's see if we could do that, we would finish the situation a lot faster. Thank you, Aina. Thank you, Gwendoline. Thank you, Gabriel, for this conversation and for these ideas, considerations, and above all, this solidarity. Solidarity is not ending with the genocide, but it's helping people that are going through this genocide. I would like to thank you all for this time. I'd like to thank the time that are watching us directly and those of you who will see us through our YouTube channel. Let me remind you that this event is possible thanks to the Green European Foundation and the local partner of the foundation, which is Nous Horizons Foundation. And this is it. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the interpreters and with Jaume and Alphonse, who have done a great job. And the next Green Red Dialogue will be December. We cannot just tell you exactly when, but very soon. So let's continue with this information in our channels. Thank you so much, and I hope that this event is not necessary anymore in the coming months. Thank you.